Cory Crowley, Republican strategist, is standing by in Washington. And Steve Farnsworth, U.S. political analyst, is also joining us from Washington to get their take on what exactly is going on here. Cory, maybe I can start with you and what you make of this summit.
Well, first of all, it's absolutely disgusting. And Donald Trump, who ran for president based upon the premise that Barack Obama was weak, that Barack Obama was terrible both for domestic affairs and for global affairs, that Democrats don't care about the strength of our military or the strength of our country or American exceptionalism, has made a mockery once again of himself. I don't know how anybody can still support a president who literally has no understanding of fact, no care for truth, wakes up every morning, and if he wakes up and tells you that the sky is neon orange, the sky's neon orange, and he goes around and sells it to everyone. Americans expect strength from a leader. There's been no higher presidential approval rating in the history of the presidential approval ratings than for George W. Bush in September of 2001, where his approval rating hit 90%. Why? Because he pushed back against an attack against America with the strength that people expect of an American president. And this president just travels the world and capitulates to dictators and bullies.
You know, Steve, there were questions about why Trump would even do this to begin with. Now we see the results. There was nothing super dramatic here. I mean, it's not as if Trump said that NATO would cancel their maneuvers or that the United States would recognize Russian control over Crimea or lift sanctions. But nevertheless, what did you make of the two of them just agreeing to meet and having what seemed to be a pretty cordial conversation?
Well, certainly any expert in Russian relations would never recommended this meeting. I mean, you are rewarding a dictatorship that is occupying other countries in Europe, that has done more than almost any country in the world to manipulate the American electoral process. You're looking at a situation where a phone conversation would have been sufficient if you were listening to the experts. But the problem, I think, with the Donald Trump presidency above all is that he doesn't listen to the experts. He thinks somehow that he's living in some sort of buddy movie where a bromance can trump, if you will, all the historical reasons why Russia and the United States are adversaries. It is breathtaking in the extreme that Donald Trump will side with the Russians when he's asked to talk about the Mueller investigation, which, by the way, has involved guilty pleas from his own national security advisor and charges against his former campaign chair, as well as more than a dozen Russians in the past week alone, to deal with this manipulation of the American election. American presidents are supposed to stand up for America, and there wasn't much evidence of that today.
There's something else, too, Cory, that I'm curious about, which has to do with mixed messaging we're getting from Washington within the White House itself, within the Trump administration, that the president seems to contradict or dismiss or undercut his own government when it comes to Russia, that he's almost pursuing his own personal strategy with Russia, that in some ways, Cory, really seems to be kind of completely separate from the rest of what the U.S. government is doing. Case in point, you know, those 12 Russians charged on Friday with interfering in the election. What do you make of it?
Of course, you know, the actions of the special counsel are supposed to be separate from those of the president. So it's not surprising that that could go off on a different track. But he's on a separate track from his own national security advisors, the director of national intelligence, most of the staff that's over there with him now telling press behind closed doors this isn't how they expected this summit to go. And the president took it off script. Now, they're just fools if they thought they were going to keep this man on script, because as we've known from the very beginning, Donald Trump cares about one person on earth and one person on earth only, and that's himself. He will throw anyone else under the bus and do anything else to get himself ahead. He's a terrible negotiator, despite what he believes or says about himself, and it's no shock, having seen this meeting, that his companies have gone to bankruptcy so many times. He's not just morally bankrupt, but he's bankrupt in every characteristic that he's tried to sell to the American public for the last 4 years.
Something else, too, Steve, I wonder if you think there's a bit of a theater of the absurd quality when people were asking questions to Vladimir Putin about whether he interfered in the election. I mean, did anybody actually think he was going to stand up there in front of the international press and say, well, yes, in fact, I authorized undermining American democracy. I didn't want Hillary Clinton to be president?
Well, of course, no one really expected Vladimir Putin to tell the truth. That's one of the realities of dealing with somebody whose career is up and coming through the KGB. It is really absurd to put Vladimir Putin on a stage with Donald Trump like this from the point of view of American interests. I mean, imagine if after Pearl Harbor, Emperor Hirohito and FDR had a joint news conference, or if Lincoln had said both sides have something to answer for in the wake of the rise of the Confederacy. I mean, this is a fundamental absurdity from the point of view of American interests and American values. The whole reason why there was a Cold War had a lot to do with American values and the idea that America's position in the world is enhanced by the promotion of free societies and democratic societies. It is really astonishing that huge advantage that America has had, an advantage that has been used by Republican and Democratic presidents both in the fighting against authoritarianism for 80 years, is simply walked away from by President Trump, who, as my fellow panelist is mentioning, is mainly interested in looking out for Donald Trump.
I want to read a statement issued by Senator John McCain of Arizona, who certainly has a lot of foreign affairs experience. He said today's press conference in Helsinki was one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. The damage inflicted by President Trump's naivete, egotism, false equivalence, and sympathy for autocrats is difficult to calculate, but it is clear the summit in Helsinki was a tragic mistake. So what happens now, Cory, do you think?
Well, the hard part about this, Todd, is that neither party and very few people in Washington in elected office have any credibility with the American public when it comes to anything like this. Barack Obama, bolstered by the Democrats, all of the same people who are currently in Democratic leadership, speaking ill and pushing back against President Trump, they bolstered Barack Obama as he went around the world on an apology tour, as he had no real foreign policy experience, as he didn't believe in American exceptionalism. So it's tough to listen to criticism from them against Donald Trump now. And by the same token, if Republicans remain quiet, there's going to be nobody left with integrity. I will say this about John McCain when it comes to foreign affairs. He's remained extremely consistent over the course of his lifetime of public service in a belief in American exceptionalism and a belief in American military strength. And he's one of very few people who can speak with credibility in this situation.
The last word goes to you, Steve, whether you think this is a big win for Vladimir Putin.
Of course, it's a big win for Vladimir Putin. The main goal of the Soviet Union and Russia after that has been to drive wedges between the Western democratic powers, to undermine the value advantage that they had that I talked about a moment ago. And for Vladimir Putin, you look at today and you look at the relative silence of most Republicans, again, John McCain, a notable exception, and you can see that that America has had a kind of a Munich-like conversation, if you will, in Helsinki this week. It's a big win for Putin, to be sure.
Gentlemen, great to have the two of you with us as we cover this summit in Helsinki, Finland. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.